Good evening, my dears, and welcome. I'm Lady McCreepster. I do apologize for the short hiatus. I have been traveling outside my realm and am, in fact, still beyond it. So do bear with me if uploads aren't as frequent. Since so many of you have asked, I thought it'd be a great time to check in on Mr. Rogers and Frankenteddy. So come, lean in closer, and we'll begin. I stared disbelievingly at the page I'd torn off in my hand. The symbol was the same as the one I saw in hell. There was no doubt about that. I heard a rustling from behind me, and Miss Hatchetface's voice said, "Do you need some help with that, Mr. Rogers?" I crumpled the paper in my fist and quickly stuffed it in my pocket. "What was that?" Miss Hatchetface asked. "It was a cute drawing Sarah did in class," I lied. "That's lovely," Miss Hatchetface smiled, but the joy didn't quite touch her eyes. Resting there was something more akin to suspicion. "Well, I'll just get that desk for you then," she said, stepping around me and lifting the school desk as if it were nothing. I watched her carry the desk off into the garage before sliding the paper out of my pocket once again. I pulled up my cell phone camera to take a picture, then stuffed the paper back in my pocket, resolving to get rid of the evidence that I'd been snooping later. As I was doing so, something else caught my eye. The remote of minor inconveniences was just laying carelessly discarded on the coffee table. I grabbed the little black rectangle with purple buttons and stuffed it into my pocket as well. I stood there in the middle of the living room, waiting for Miss Hatchetface to return so that I could try my best to act natural, but she didn't come. Confused, I went back to the garage to investigate. I put my ear up to the door, but all I could hear was a faint murmuring. I edged the remote out of my pocket, scanning it to see if there was something that might help me better hear. My eyes roved over the many buttons, taking in things like flaming burps, 2 left feet, and hairy tongue before finally settling on one button, a button I'd seen Sarah use on Frankenteddy once before. Dumbo mode. I took a hard swallow in anticipation of what I knew the remote was going to do to me. I pointed it at my head and pressed the button. Instantly, I felt a disturbing sensation as my ears became numb, but not numb. Like someone with soft, gloved hands was pulling on them, but instead of hurting, the ears just expanded like silly putty. I felt my left ear and discovered that it was now roughly 2 times the size of my hand. I pressed it to the door. The indistinct murmurs had now become hushed whispers, quiet, but clear enough for me to make out. "I keep telling you, we should have these conversations in hell," came Miss Hatchetface's urgent whisper. I strained my giant ears, listening for another voice, but there was none. "I think he's starting to suspect something. I told you not to send that old woman." There was another gap in the conversation as Miss Hatchetface listened to whoever it was. Yes, I told you, she's almost ready. I've never seen anyone learn magic so fast. You must have been right about her. Just get construction done on your end." There was another long silence, and then the shuffling of feet coming towards the door. I darted back into the living room as quickly and as silently as I could, padding up the stairs as I fumbled with the remote of minor inconveniences. Then I ran into a fuzzy brick wall. Scratch that. It was Frankenteddy. Time slowed as I began to fall backwards over the stairs, and I wondered if they'd be able to shrink my ears back down after I died from a broken neck. But I didn't die. Instead, an enormous furry paw reached out and grabbed me by the front of my shirt, yanking me roughly back to my feet. As he pulled me to a stop, my giant ears wobbled ridiculously. "Pardon me, Lord Rogers," Frank and Teddy's voice boomed at least twice as loud in my new giant ears. "It's okay, really. I just need to get by so that I can—" "It seems you have altered your appearance." Frank and Teddy droned on, oblivious to my wincing at the monstrous cacophony of his voice. "Wise decision. Your nose looks much smaller compared to your new ears." Wait, what's wrong with my nose? "There is nothing wrong with it. It is glorious and noble, like my father's nose." "Oh, well, that's—" "He was a toucan Samdal." "Right. Thanks, Frank and Teddy." I heard a delicate throat clear, and I turned to see Miss Hatchetface standing at the foot of my stairs. "Oh my," she said, her voice choked and strained as if she was trying to hold back laughter. "What happened to your ears, Mr. Rogers?" "I just got to fooling around with the remote," I said sheepishly. "Do you know how to reverse it?" "Just hit the previous channel button," she laughed. I pointed the remote at my head and did as she said. My ears shrunk down, but then I heard the sound of ripping fabric, and there was a new, peculiar sensation I'd never felt before. It felt like... "Miss Hatchetface?" I said. "Yes, Mr. Rogers?" "Do I have a pig's tail?" "Yes, Mr. Rogers." "How do I get rid of the tail?" "Hit the mute button." "Thank you." I pointed the remote at myself and hit the mute button, and I felt a slight breeze through the hole in my pants where the tail had been. "Your appearance has been restored to normal," Frank and Teddy boomed. "Your nose is once again the glorious apex of your face." "Thank you, Frank and Teddy. I need to go upstairs to the study and get some work done." "Of course, Lord Rogers." Frank and Teddy stepped to the side, and with some difficulty, I managed to squeeze past him. I went into the study and pulled up my laptop, opened up the web browser, and began scouring the internet for information about the pentagram I'd found. I pored over dozens of websites, ranging from the encyclopedic right down to the disturbing. Finally, I found what I was looking for. The website was down a link rabbit hole. The URL, just a string of random numbers. It was the kind of website that search engines don't index, that you can only get to by following link after link haphazardly until you stumble upon it accidentally. But I had found it. It looked as if it hadn't been touched in years. Like those old blog sites from the mid-90s. There was only one page and no other explanation except for the blood-red letters that peeled out of the solid black background and a carbon copy of the pentagram I had now saved in my phone. I leaned in closely, and I could see the light from the computer screen bottom lighting my face in the black reflection of the screen as I scanned the article. The Ritual of Amud Magar. The Ritual of Amud Magar is perhaps the most ancient and powerful of all satanic rites. To understand this ritual, you must first understand that the realms of earth and hell are separated by a dimensional barrier. The barrier is impenetrable, but it is not perfect. At certain places on earth, the places where great evil has occurred, there exists tiny cracks, just large enough for the souls of those who perpetrated the evil to pass through. An act of extreme evil may even allow for some demons to send a piece of their souls through the cracks and haunt those who visit such places. The ritual of Amud Magar works to widen these cracks so that larger demonic souls may escape back up to Earth's surface. Then, as I read the last paragraph, my mouth went dry. My tongue felt as if it had swelled up, cutting off my air supply. I heard a sudden ringing in my ears. This rite is only theoretical and has never been used. as it requires the Dark Lord Satan himself to perform it in hell. It is said if the ritual is performed in concert with Satan's direct descendant on earth, the Dark Lord himself may return. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Hello, Darren." I whirled around in my office chair to see Miss Robbins standing in the open doorway, those ancient, hateful, milky yellow reptilian eyes glowering at me over her thick fishbowl lenses. "How did you get in here?" I said. "The door was locked." Miss Robbins only clicked her tongue and moved closer to me. "You're not going to stop Satan from taking over this filthy little rock you call Earth," she said, wagging her finger at me. "You're too late. The ritual has already begun." Two thoughts went through my head at this point. One, Miss Robbins looked more like a frog than ever, and two, I still had the remote of minor inconveniences stuffed in my back pocket. Before any more thoughts had time to fleet across my consciousness, I had yanked it out of my pocket and begun mashing buttons randomly as I pointed it at Miss Robbins. "What?" But her voice was completely cut off as a blast of silver light hit her directly in the tongue, making it grow to monstrous proportions and flop out of her mouth and onto the ground. She yelled at me, hurling a ball of green fire directly at my head. I ducked just in time and the fire shattered off the wall behind me, sending off little green sparks that ignited the carpet wherever they landed. I seized the office chair and hurled it at her, and as she ducked, I managed to pound a couple more buttons. The first blast missed and hit the wall, causing a huge patch of wavy purple hair to erupt through shattered pieces of drywall, but the second blast struck her right in the stomach, sending her toppling over backwards, covered in orange and silver feathers. She sprang back to her feet with surprising agility, heaving a black blob at me that I deflected into the wall with my laptop. I dropped the laptop when I realized that a dozen little oily hands had grown out of it and begun reaching out to grab me. I hit her with one last blast of bright golden light, and she burst into laughter. At first, I thought she was mocking me, until I looked down to see that I'd hit the little purple button shaped like a hand that read "Tickle Fit" underneath. Triumphant and merciless, I marched towards her, mashing the volume button over and over again. Her laughter first became uproarious gales and then thunderous shrieks as I tormented her. Distracted by my task, I became aware of two things far too late. The first was that beneath the tempest shrieks of Miss Robbins's laughter, my stairs were screaming in protest as heavy feet took them two at a time, and the second was that a bit of green fire had dripped down from the ceiling of my study and had landed directly on my head, and in 2 seconds, my hair would be entirely engulfed in flames. The culmination of those two events came at the same time. Frankenteddy appeared in my doorway from downstairs, and I felt the white-hot fire as it touched my scalp. "You are on fire!" Frankenteddy boomed as he hurdled the shrieking Mrs. Robbins and raced towards me. "Allow me to pat it out!" "Frankenteddy, no!" But my cry went unheeded. The darkness enveloped me as Frankenteddy's monstrous paw came crashing down on my head. I awoke in my own bed, the faces of my demonic family and Sarah staring down at me. I noted with pleasure that Miss Robbins and Satan were both absent among them. I reached up to feel my scalp and breathed a sigh of relief when I felt hair there. That relief was fizzled out, however, when I saw that the few loose strands that came off in my hand were wavy and purple. Miss Hatchetface's face wrinkled up in concern. "Are you okay, Mr. Rogers?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay now." "Well, that's good," a familiar voice said from behind me. "You gave us quite a scare there, Derek." I tilted my head up to see Satan grinning down at me. Oh, no. My, I wonder what sort of trouble Mr. Rogers has just gotten himself in. If you've missed the previous episodes of this series, a link to the playlist is in the description below. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, click on that subscribe button along with that bell icon. I'll see you soon, my dears. Sweet dreams.